Welcome back. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, and follow me at DirtleMTG on Twitter to keep up to date with the most recent videos and other posts. You can help support this content by hitting like and share, and by checking out the links in the description below. Alright, it's time to dirtle. Hello. Today let's visit the swamps of Urborg, where awakened here is the soul of Windgrace to fend off intruders. The creatures encroaching on this land, however, are Halana and Alena, Wren and Seri, and Sythis, Harvest Hand. I win the die roll, and draw a Valakut Exploration. I drop a Stomping Ground tapped, and pass. The Huntresses play a Forest. Birds of Paradise is cast afterward. The Inseparable Ones play a Forest. Sythis begins their game plan with a Forest as well. I'm going to have to say this a lot again, aren't I? Back to me, and I draw a Roiling Regrowth. I play a Luxury Suite, and then cast Secure Tribe Elder. The Huntresses drop a Mountain, and then cast a Champion of Lamholt, a dangerous card to be sure. Wren and Seri likewise also play a Mountain on their turn, and they pass. Sythis drops a Plains, and their commander hits the field. I draw a Painful Truth for the turn. I drop Shinka, the Blood-Soaked Keep, and then cast Valakut Exploration. I move to combat and swing the Elder into the Huntress player, seeing what might happen. To my surprise, they block with the Champion of Lamholt, and both trade in combat. I am fine with this outcome. Back to the Huntresses, and a Strip Mine hits the table. Toski, Bearer of Secrets, is cast afterward. The Wren and Seri player passes their turn, saying they're having trouble dropping some lands despite having 40 in the deck. I know that feeling. Sterling Grove is quick to the stack for the Sythis player on their turn. A Forest comes down afterward. An Escape to the Wilds comes to me, and I play a Rootbound Crag. Valakut Exploration triggers, and Geodranger goes into exile under it. That's a sadness. With no lands in the graveyard, I decide to cast Painful Truths, paying 3 different colors. I get 2 lands and Sword of Hearth and Home to the hand, losing 3 life, and I pass. At the end of the turn, Geodranger goes to the graveyard from exile, and Exploration deals 1 to my opponents. A Forest to the field for the Huntress on their turn. Their commander then graces the battlefield, and they move to combat. With the trigger from their commander, they give 2 1/1 counters to the Birds of Paradise, and swing the birds at me and Toski at the Sythis player. Both connect, and the Huntress player draws 2 cards. 2 Wren and Seri, and they pass again. At this point, I tell them that if I hit Pier's Whim, I'll help them out getting a land, but drawing it this early is a very slim chance. The Harvest Hand casts Earthcraft, gaining 1 life and drawing a card from their commander. Command Tower then hits the field, and Elvish Mystic follows it down. Earthcraft is activated by tapping Sythis to untap a Forest. They untap another land using Earthcraft with the Elf, and then cast Touch the Spirit Realm. When it enters, they exile Toski under it until Touch leaves play. My turn brings me a Blasphemous Act. I drop a Snow-Covered Forest, and exile Lithoform Blight under Exploration. I decide to dive for the Pier's Whim, and cast Escape to the Wilds. I get a Swamp, a Phyrexian Arena, Malakir Rebirth, Notvold Slumberwood, and Phylath. They all go into exile, though I do get to play the Swamp as an extra land drop. Standard note here, all of my basics in the deck are snow, along with some other lands. At the end of the turn, Exploration puts Lithoform into the grave, and deals 1 to my opponents. The Huntress player casts a Vidurus Gearhulk on their turn, and when it enters, they give all the counters to their commander. They move to combat and return the favor to the Gearhulk, giving it 6 new counters of its own. They swing their commander and the Gearhulk into the Sythis player thanks to the haste from the Huntress's trigger, and the Sythis player takes a chunk of 16 damage, dropping to 22. To the Wren and Seri player, and they find a land. A Mountain hits the field, and they cast a Selesnya Cluestone. To Sythis, and a Forest hits the field. Exploration, the green one, not the red one, is cast, and they gain life and a card. Sigil of the Empty Throne hits the stack, and we're all in danger. Earthcraft is then used to untap a land, and a player casts a Survival of the Fittest. Their commander continues the trigger train with the addition of the new Angel token. Earthcraft is then used again, and an Arbor Elf is cast. Back to me, and it's time to get some things under control. I draw a command tower, and play a Swamp. Rockfall Vale goes into exile under exploration. I then cast Blasphemous Act for 1 in red, and the board gets wiped of its creatures. From exile, I then cast Phyrexian Arena for some more card draw, and then pass the turn sad about losing Phylath from exile to the graveyard, but my opponents do take another damage. The Huntress's turn has an Incubation Druid hit the field. Elvish Mystic follows it down. The Ren Seri player play a Farce for the turn, and then cast their commander, the Inseparable Ones. Over to Sythis, and an Eidolon of Blossom hits the stack. An Angel token is created, and the enchantment creature comes down. Luminarch Ascension then follows it, and I'm worried about being overrun by angels all of a sudden. Well, more than before. Serra's Sanctum is dropped to the table for some more flavor wins, and then a Plains. Earthcraft helps untap a land, and Sanctum produces 8 mana. A Forest is tapped for green, and Sythis returns, gaining them another angel. Earthcraft again helps untap a forest, and then Green Sun's Zenith is cast where X equals 3. Sythis Champion enters the battlefield off the tutor. Solitary Confinement is cast, and the player draws a card, gains a life, and when it enters, they draw 2 more cards. Earthcraft continues to be used twice more, and Collector Oath is cast. Finally done, they pass the turn. To me, and I draw a Scapeshift and a Timely Pernicious Deed. I drop a command tower and exile Solkenzon. I then cast the deed. Once it is in play, I activate it where X equals 5, hoping to heavily damage the overextended Sythis. The board is wiped of everything except lands, and I pass my turn with a land stuck in exile. The Huntress player goes straight to combat on their turn, and swings the Toski they got back from the touch of the Spirit Realm leaving the battlefield at the Sythis player. It connects, and they draw a card. In the second main, they cast Xanagos the Reveler, and activate the 0 ability on the Planeswalker to make a Satyr token, and pass. Back to the Inseparable Ones, and a plane hits the field. Cultivate is cast, and a Plains enters tapped, while another land goes to hand. Sythis begins their turn by recasting their commander. Rest in Peace is cast, and the commander triggers and resolves, and the enchantment comes down. When it enters, graveyards are exiled, and the card itself shuts off a good portion of my deck. Null Rod then hits the battlefield, and I begin thinking the player really hates artifacts. My turn gives me an ironic Balged Recovery. I cast a Roiling Regrowth, sacrificing a Swamp, which will get exiled, and grabbing a Mountain and a Forest. I play Solkenzon from exile somehow, and then cast Read the Bones. I scry 2 and keep both Mina and Den and the Nesting Dragon on top, and draw those 2 cards while losing 2 life. I pass. The Huntress player goes again to combat, and Toski is swung at the Ren Seri player, and the Satyr token at Sythis. Both connect, and the Huntress player draws 2 cards. In the second main, they cast a Pelt Collector, and it hits the field, followed by an Outland Liberator. When the Liberator enters, the Pelt Collector triggers, gaining a 1/1 counter. Xanagos is then used to make another Satyr token, and the turn rolls over. A Forest enters the battlefield for Ren and Seri. They then recast their commander, and the Huntress player responds by sacrificing their Outland Liberator to destroy Sythis. The stack resolves, and the Inseparable player passes. Back to Sythis the player. They recast their commander, using 8 mana to do so. Kataki War's Wage then enters, and it's another artifact hate card. Urza has hurt people. My turn draws me an Animate Dead, which isn't too useful at the moment. I cast Mina and Den, and follow that up with the Nesting Dragon. I then drop the backside of Balged Recovery, Balged Sanctuary, and gain a Dragon Egg token. I pass. A Forest enters the field for the Huntress player, and then they activate Xanagos to add some mana to their mana pool, which happens to be 4 green. Herd Baloth is then cast, and once in play, Pelt Collector triggers to gain more counters. 2 combat, and the Toski and 1 Satyr token swing into the Sythis player. The Sythis player blocks Toski with their commander, and the player takes 2 while the Huntress player draws a card. Over to the Inseparable Ones. A Plains hits the field, and they cast a Feline Sovereign. Their commander triggers, creating a 1/1 dog token. Then they cast Kahira, the Orphan Guard, and create another good boy. The turn moves to Sythis, and Null Rod triggers, which ironically only affects the Null Rod. The Sythis player pays to keep it around, and then cast Hallowed Haunting. Their commander does the triggering, and the enchantment enters the field. Fertile Ground is cast, and Hallowed Haunting sees its first trigger, creating a Spirit Cleric token. This is followed by a Garthian Enchantress and Enchantress's Presence. They gain another Cleric token and draw 2 more cards. In response to these triggers though, the Ren and Seri player casts Terror of Wear and Tear, destroying the Hallowed Haunting. The stack resolves and the Sythis player passes. My turn draws me a Sprouting Goblin. Nice, I was hoping to use this. I cast the new card with Kicker and get a Woodland Chasm from the deck. I play the land and gain another Dragon Egg token. I then activate Mina and Den, bouncing Sokenzon back to my hand and giving Nesting Dragon trample. I go to attacks and swing the dragon at the Sythis player, dealing 5. They drop to 19. In the second main, I decide to replay Sokenzon and gain yet another Dragon Egg. I pass afterward. Back to the Huntresses, and Xanagos is activated again for mana. They add 5 green mana and cast Ruick Thar the Unbowed. That gets in the way of my plans to deal with the Walker, unfortunately. Pelt Collector gets bigger, and they move to combat. Toski is swung at the Inseparable player, and they let it through, taking 1. The Huntress player draws a card. Ren and Seri's turn has a Forest enter the battlefield. Harmonize hits the stack, and Ruick Thar triggers for the first time, dealing 6 damage to the Inseparable player. They then draw 3 cards once it resolves. Cub Warden is then cast as a mutate, and mutates under their commander. Unfortunately, the Sythis player leaves the game at this point. They were suffering from connection issues most of the game, and decide just to call it. The Inseparable player gains 2 cat tokens otherwise from the Cub Warden mutate, and a dog token. My turn rolls up, and I draw a Dragonskull Summit. Now untethered by the Sythis player's graveyard effects, I can put my plans into action. I activate the Sprouting Goblin and sacrifice a mountain to draw a card, which happens to be Takenuma Abandoned Mire. I finally cast my commander, Soul of Windgrace, and return the sacrificed mountain to the battlefield tapped. This gets me another Dragon Egg. I then pay to discard Takenuma and mill some cards into the graveyard. Unfortunately, I whiff with no creatures or planeswalkers, and so I play Dragonskull Summit to the field, gaining yet another token. I then cast Sword of Hearth and Home, taking 6 from Ruick Thar for doing so. Once in play, I equip the sword to the Nesting Dragon, intent on slaying Xanagos. I move to combat and attack, and the Planeswalker goes down. The Huntress's turn has them straight to attacks. Toski and Ruick Thar come my way, and I chomp with 2 Dragon Eggs. The tokens die in combat and hatch into baby dragons. It rolls to the Inseparable player, and they drop a mountain. Sandstep Scavenger is cast, and they make a new cat token. When the Scavenger enters the battlefield, it bolsters 2, adding 2 1/1 counters to a dog token. They then activate their commander, and burn away Mina and Den for 6 damage, gaining 6 life in the process. Back to me, and a forest hits the hand. I cast Animate Dead, taking 6 from Ruick Thar, and targeting Mina and Den. They return to the battlefield, and I drop a forest from hand, gaining another Dragon Egg. I then activate Mina and Den, bouncing a land and giving Windgrace trample. Moving to combat, I swing the Nest Dragon at the Huntress player and Windgrace at the Inseparable player. Artifact Mutation is cast by the Huntress player against my sword, and I activate Sprouting Goblin in response. I sack a forest and draw Golgari Charm. I then use Windgrace's ability to discard a land and draw Yavimaya Cradle of Growth. A bit redundant. I let the stack resolve until Mutation resolves, and then I respond with Golgari Charm, choosing the mode where everything gets -1/-1 until end of turn. I take another 6 damage, but I wipe the board of 6 creatures, namely the new tokens created by Artifact Mutation, so they can't get any bigger. Windgrace's attack trigger finally resolves, and I return Takenuma, gaining a Dragon Egg. 2 blocks, and Ruick Thar intercepts the Nesting Dragon, and the Inseparable player blocks with 2 of their 2/2 tokens. In response to these blocks, I activate Shinka to give a first strike to Windgrace. Damage happens, and the Nesting Dragon gets blocked and killed by Ruick Thar, and the tokens blocking Windgrace get destroyed. To the Huntresses. They're straight to combat again, and it's at me. I chump again with a Dragon Egg, and it gets to hatch into a new baby dragon. In the second main, Arbor Elf hits the field, and they pass. The Inseparable player casts Darksteel Ingot, taking 6 from Rulik Thar. This is followed by an activation of Ren and Seri, targeting my face. I drop to 13. They pass, attacking, largely having been stalled by the gummed up board state. My draw for the turn is Spire Garden. I bounce Takenuma back to my hand, and Windgrace gains Trample with Mina and Den's activation. I drop the Spire Garden and discard Takenuma using its ability and mill Rites of Flourishing, the Gitrog Monster, and Titania. I return Titania to my hand on resolution, and then cast the Elemental Protector. When they enter, I grab Takenuma back to the field for continued value. I then play Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, and follow that with activating Sprouting Goblin. I sacrifice the Balagad Sanctuary to draw a card, and that card is Ogre Battle Driver. To combat, and I swing Windgrace at the Inseparable player, and return a Forest to the field tapped from the yard. They take the 5 commander damage, and I pass afterward. Between this turn and my next turn, I count my mana 6 times to be extra sure about my new plan. The Huntress player casts Xanagos, God of Revels, to start their turn. Hey, I thought we killed that guy. It enters as a creature and triggers the Pelt Collector. They move to combat and double the Collector's power with Xanagos until end of turn. They swing Rulik Thar and the Collector at me, and unfortunately the Collector has Trample. I block the Trample with 5 Dragon Egg tokens, and chump Rulik Thar with a Dragon token that isn't an egg. Each of my tokens die, but I gain 5 newly hatched dragons back. They pass. The Inseparable has a Jungle Shrine to field. They activate their commander to deal to my face. Suppression Bonds then hits the stack, and the Inseparable player takes 6 damage from Rulik Thar. They're targeting Windgrace with the enchantment to limit the abilities, so in response I use Mina and Den to bounce Takenuma back to hand, because why not? This will be needed for next turn anyway, and they pass without attacks. To my turn, I count my mana twice more, because I mess up a lot on that. I have just enough, and so discard Takenuma. Thankfully, it has cost reduction based on how many legendary creatures I have, and so only costs me a single black mana. With its ability, I get back the Nesting Dragon to hand from the yard. I then cast the dragon, and follow that up with Ogre Battle Driver. Scapeshift is next to the stack, and I take 6 from Rurik. Scapeshift resolves, with me choosing to sacrifice nearly all of my lands, and I gain that many from the deck. In doing so, I will get a large number of Dragon Egg, Elemental, and Zombie tokens from Field of the Dead, which will all have haste and 2/0 thanks to the Ogre Battle Driver. Despite the Dragon Eggs having a defender, with these on the stack, my opponents concede the game. Good game to my opponents. Well, the deck is Landfall. Not much to say about that, but it does seem a tad slow. I'd probably work on that aspect of the deck first. Otherwise, had Sythis not had connection issues, I'd say they were certainly the favorite to win the game. Often I need my graveyard for this deck to function fully, and them leaving helped me unlock the deck's potential. Thanks for tuning in to another Casual Commander game here on Dirtle Magic. See you next time.